A 12-year-old mechanic girl from a small Montana town just solved a $1 million engine mystery that left a team of corporate engineers speechless. She didn't have a driver's license, a degree, or a fancy title, just a wrench, a notebook, and a gift for hearing what machines are really saying. What happened next? The mechanic girl, who was laughed at for being too young to fix anything, became the one who saved a multi-million-dollar prototype, and in doing so, changed how the world defines expertise. This inspiring story of how a mechanic girl solved an engine noise problem like a pro will stay with you long after it ends. Before we dive in, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. Most people drove past Mason's Auto Repair without even noticing it. Just another small-town garage on the edge of Oak Ridge, Montana chipped paint, a crooked sign, and the faint smell of gasoline that never quite went away. But for Eleanor Mason, it was home. A 12-year-old girl with grease under her nails and a fire in her heart. Eleanor had been raised around wrenches and engine parts, watching her dad fix everything from rusty farm trucks to broken-down snowmobiles. But lately, things had been different. After her father passed away, Eleanor and her uncle Dylan had been fighting to keep the shop alive. Business was slow, bills were piling up, and the bank had started calling. Still, Eleanor showed up every morning, sweeping the floors, tinkering with old carburetors, and listening to the soft hum of engines like they were speaking a language only she could understand. Most folks in town didn't think much of her, just a kid with a hobby. That's why, when a gleaming black prototype sedan rolled into Mason's Auto one afternoon with a corporate logo she couldn't pronounce and a problem no one could solve, no one expected Eleanor to be the one who'd crack a $1 million mystery wide open. The prototype rolled into Mason's Auto Repair like a spaceship that had made a wrong turn. Its body gleamed under the late afternoon sun, every line sharp, every curve humming with technological arrogance. It didn't belong here, not in a place where duct tape fixed more than it should. And the only computers were old cash registers that still rang like a bell. Eleanor watched as a woman in heels far too expensive for Oak Ridge stepped out of the car. Vanessa Whitmore, lead project director at Stratus Automotive Innovations, though. Around here, no one would have known or cared about her title. Dylan wiped his hands on a rag, his face the picture of small-town politeness. "What brings you out this way, ma'am?" Vanessa didn't smile. She glanced around the shop, eyes narrowing at the clutter of tools, the smudges on the walls, the girl with her sleeves rolled up and a wrench in her back pocket. "We've got a situation," she said. "A noise, a vibration. None of our diagnostics can pin it down. I'm told you specialize in unconventional repairs." Dylan's brow lifted. "We fix what we can." Vanessa sighed, as if every word was a chore. "We've had over 20 engineers on this vehicle. No one's found the cause, and we're 2 weeks from a major investor demo." Eleanor was already circling the car. She wasn't trying to be rude, it was instinct. The way the sunlight caught the paneling, the faint hum of the motor, it was off, like a song played slightly out of tune. Vanessa noticed, "Sweetheart, I appreciate the curiosity, but you don't even have a license." The words hung in the air. Dylan tensed. Eleanor didn't flinch. She placed her hand lightly on the hood. "You're hearing it wrong," she said, almost to herself. "It's not a malfunction. It's a miscommunication." Vanessa scoffed. "Excuse me." Eleanor looked up. "Your systems, they're fighting each other. The sensors are correcting for phantom feedback because the electric drive and mechanical couplings are out of sync." Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "And you know this because—" Eleanor tapped her ear gently. "Because I can hear it." The shop went quiet. Dylan knew better than to interrupt when Eleanor got like this. Her father used to say she didn't fix engines, she listened to them, the way a musician listens to an instrument that's slightly off-key. Vanessa folded her arms. Listen, I don't have time for fairy tales. This vehicle's technology is years ahead of what's in your shop. That's the problem, Eleanor replied. You built each part to be perfect on its own. But machines aren't supposed to be soloists. They're supposed to be an orchestra. For a moment, Vanessa didn't respond. Then she let out a breath, half frustration, half intrigue. Fine, prove it. Dylan's jaw tightened. She doesn't have to. But Eleanor was already moving. She grabbed her notebook from the workbench, flipping through pages filled with sketches, waveforms, and notes scribbled in pencil. She pointed to a diagram, a simplified feedback loop. If you let me adjust the coupler resonance and bypass the noise suppression filters, I can get them to align naturally. It won't be perfect, but it'll talk to you. You'll feel it. Vanessa's lips pursed. This isn't a science fair. No, Eleanor said calmly. But it is your last chance. For all her corporate polish, Vanessa wasn't stupid. She knew when someone was bluffing. And she could see it in Eleanor's eyes. This wasn't bravado. It was certainty. All right, she said, stepping aside. You've got 15 minutes. Eleanor didn't waste a second. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't experimenting. She was listening. She adjusted the coupling tension, bypassed a miscalibrated feedback loop, and recalibrated the sensors by ear, not by code. Dylan handed her tools without asking. This was her stage now. 15 minutes later, the engine hummed, not in defiance, not in chaos, in harmony. Vanessa stood still, staring as the vehicle purred with a rhythm none of her specialists had achieved. How? She whispered. How did you? Eleanor smiled, wiping her hands on her overalls. You were too busy trying to control it. You never thought to listen. Vanessa didn't answer, but in her silence was a shift. The girl she had dismissed had just solved $1 million problem. Not with degrees, not with fancy equipment, but with instinct, patience, and a gift no algorithm could replicate. The garage was still humming with the soft rhythm of the prototype's engine when the next surprise rolled in. A black SUV, tinted windows and all, pulled up just outside Mason's Auto Repair. 2 men in dark suits stepped out, moving with the kind of rehearsed precision that didn't belong in small towns. They didn't look like customers. They looked like people who weren't used to hearing no. Vanessa's expression changed instantly. Her polished demeanor faltered. Stay here, she muttered to Eleanor and Dylan as she strode outside to meet them. But Eleanor wasn't the type to stay back when she knew trouble was brewing. From the shadow of the garage door, Eleanor watched. The taller man, silver-haired and stiff as a board, spoke first. Ms. Whitmore. We were informed the prototype is being handled outside authorized facilities. Vanessa crossed her arms, a flicker of defiance in her stance. Handled. Yes. Mishandled. No. The situation is under control. The second man, younger, but with a sharpness in his eyes, glanced toward the garage. In a roadside shop with a child mechanic, Eleanor felt Dylan's hand on her shoulder, a silent warning to stay calm. But her jaw tightened. She didn't like being referred to like that, like she wasn't even in the room. Would you like to hear it run? Vanessa asked, her tone sharp. The older man waved dismissively. Our interest isn't in the sound. It's in the contract. If Stratus Automotive Innovations allows unauthorized personnel to alter proprietary systems, the deal is nullified. Vanessa's lips pressed into a thin line. Then I suggest you redefine unauthorized, because no one on your team has been able to do what that 12-year-old just accomplished. Eleanor's heart pounded. This wasn't just about the car anymore. This was about power, about control, and right now, that control was slipping out of their hands. The men didn't push further. They turned, muttering into a phone, before disappearing into their SUV and driving off in a cloud of gravel dust. Vanessa re-entered the garage, her face a mixture of anger and admiration. "I've seen plenty of corporate vultures," Dylan muttered, "but those two take the cake." Vanessa ignored him. Her gaze was fixed on Eleanor. "You need to understand something," she said. "What you did today, it's going to ruffle feathers. Big ones." Eleanor tilted her head, unconcerned. "I didn't know engines had feathers." Dylan chuckled, but Vanessa didn't smile. "I'm serious. You outperformed people with doctorates, people who don't take kindly to being outsmarted by a girl without a license. They'll say it's luck. They'll say it's impossible. But what they won't do is admit you're better than them." Eleanor wiped her hands on her overalls. "I'm not better. I just listen longer." That simple sentence seemed to catch Vanessa off guard. But there was no time to bask in victory. Her phone rang, sharp and urgent. She answered, pacing. "Yes, sir. We've resolved the resonance issue. The prototype is stable. No, not by the diagnostics team, by a consultant." She glanced at Eleanor, a spark of something respect, perhaps in her eyes. As Vanessa continued the call, Dylan turned to his niece. "You know you've started a storm, right?" Eleanor shrugged. "Maybe someone needs to get wet." Suddenly, the engine flickered, not in failure but in adjustment. Eleanor's hands flew to the console, stabilizing the output, compensating for a hidden glitch that was about to escalate. It was instinctual, fast, precise. Vanessa hung up, stunned. "How did you—" Eleanor smiled. It wasn't finished talking yet. That was the moment Vanessa understood. This wasn't a fluke. Eleanor didn't guess. She knew. What Stratos saw as a malfunction, Eleanor saw as a conversation. And she had just spoken fluent machine in a dialect none of their engineers even realized existed. Vanessa exhaled slowly. "I want you at the investor presentation." Dylan raised a brow. "She doesn't even have a learner's permit." "I don't need her to drive," Vanessa said. "I need her to win." Eleanor didn't smile. She just nodded, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Because for her it was— 2 days later, Eleanor Mason stood on a platform she never imagined she'd be near. The Stratos Automotive Innovations testing facility was the polar opposite of Mason's auto repair. Sterile, spotless, and filled with glass walls and touchscreens. It looked more like a science fiction movie than a place where cars were built. Eleanor's boots squeaked awkwardly against the polished floors, her oil-stained hoodie and worn overalls a glaring contrast to the navy suits and clipboard-wielding executives that bustled past her. She didn't care, she had no reason to. Standing beside her was Vanessa Whitmore, now dressed in a sleek black suit, every hair perfectly in place, yet noticeably less uptight. Vanessa had been watching Eleanor differently since that afternoon in Oak Ridge, not as a liability, but as a wild card she needed. "You don't have to speak," Vanessa whispered. "Just stand next to the car. That'll be enough." Eleanor didn't answer. She was busy watching the prototype sitting under showroom lights. It looked different here, like it didn't belong. It had performed better in that dusty old garage than in this perfect glass box. Machines didn't like being on display. They liked to work. Across the room, a panel of investors sat in an elevated viewing area, murmuring to each other. Their attention flickered between financial reports and the girl who wasn't supposed to be there. And then the words came, soft, yet piercing through the hum of the room. "Who's the kid?" One of the executives asked it loud enough for everyone to hear. A polite chuckle passed through the crowd, the kind meant to belittle without sounding cruel. Vanessa didn't flinch. "She's the reason this car runs." That silenced them, but not for long. "Surely you don't expect us to believe a child fixed what your entire engineering division couldn't," another man said, half laughing, half scoffing. Eleanor had heard that tone before, many times, from customers who told her to go get her dad when she tried to explain a problem, from mechanics who thought her hands were too small to hold a wrench, from teachers who said she was distracted when she stared out the window, listening to vibrations only she could hear. She looked directly at the man. "I don't expect you to believe anything," she said. "Voice, even. But the car will—" Vanessa smiled, a small, sharp smile, and gestured toward the vehicle. "Let's show them." The room dimmed as the prototype powered up, its systems lit in perfect sequence. No glitches, no stutters. Eleanor could tell immediately the car was comfortable. The adjustments she made back in Oak Ridge had stuck. It wasn't fighting anymore. It was breathing. As the car began its demonstration, navigating a complex series of maneuvers, responding to commands with precision, Eleanor noticed something. The people who had laughed minutes ago were now leaning forward, their eyes narrowing, their faces tightening. Doubt was turning into curiosity. Curiosity was turning into disbelief. By the end of the demo, the room was silent. No one spoke until a gray-haired man near the front leaned into his microphone. "How?" Vanessa looked at Eleanor, but this time, she didn't step in. Eleanor walked up to the edge of the platform, her small frame dwarfed by the vastness of the showroom, and said simply, "You kept telling it what to do. I asked it what it needed." The simplicity of her answer landed harder than any technical breakdown could have. One by one, expressions began to shift. Skepticism faded. Arrogance softened. They weren't just seeing a clever girl, they were seeing a blind spot in their own process. The belief that innovation only comes from high-rise offices and PhDs had just been quietly dismantled by a 12-year-old in a grease-stained hoodie. As the investors began murmuring, this time in genuine discussion, Vanessa leaned in, her voice low. "You've done more in 2 days than our teams have in 6 months." Eleanor shrugged. "Maybe you were listening to the wrong people?" Vanessa chuckled softly. "Not anymore." At that moment, the shift wasn't just in the room, it was in Vanessa too. For the first time, she saw the beauty in what she had overlooked. That genius wasn't always about data. Sometimes, it was about patience, about trust, about listening to those who see the world differently. And in that brightly lit showroom, among polished shoes and corporate forecasts, a girl without a license had quietly rewritten the definition of expertise. The next morning, Eleanor found herself sitting in a glass-walled conference room that felt more like a fishbowl than a meeting space. The city's skyline of Riverside Heights loomed outside the windows so far from Oak Ridge. It might as well have been another planet. Vanessa sat beside her, tapping through presentations on a sleek tablet. Gone was the corporate stiffness. She wasn't trying to manage Eleanor anymore. She was learning from her. "Stratus wants to offer you a mentorship," Vanessa said, turning the screen so Eleanor could see. "It's not school. It's not an internship. It's something new. You'd work directly with our engineering leads. Help us rethink how we approach design. We're calling it the Harmony Program, because of what you said about machines being an orchestra." Eleanor stared at the images flashing across the screen, labs filled with cutting-edge technology, simulation rooms, a small prototype workshop labeled Eleanor's Lab. "I thought you just needed me to fix the prototype," she said. Vanessa smiled. "I thought so too. But you didn't just fix it. You changed us. You made us realize we've been building machines to obey, not to cooperate. That's a blind spot we can't afford anymore." Eleanor didn't respond immediately. Her fingers traced the worn edges of her spiral notebook, the same one filled with engine sketches she'd carried for years. Dylan had always told her, "Fixing a machine is easy. Getting people to listen to what it's telling them, that's the hard part." Now, people were finally listening. But Eleanor wasn't the type to jump at shiny opportunities. She wanted to understand. "What happens to Mason's auto?" she asked. "Eyes steady? It's my home." Vanessa didn't flinch. "It stays your home. This isn't about taking you away. It's about amplifying what you already are. You'll work with us on your terms. We'll set up a satellite workshop in Oak Ridge. You won't have to wear a suit or sit through meetings. You'll just do what you do best." Eleanor leaned back in her chair, the weight of it all settling in. She was 12. She didn't have a license. But here she was, being offered a chance to shape the future of automotive engineering not because of a degree, but because she listened better than the rest. Later that afternoon, they took her to the Stratus Innovation Center. Most kids would have been dazzled by the tech 3D printers building entire engine blocks. AI diagnostics, simulation pods that looked like gaming chairs from the future. But Eleanor's eyes drifted to a quiet corner where an old combustion engine sat on a workbench, half disassembled, forgotten. "Can I take a look at that one?" she asked. The technician looked puzzled. "That's a fossil. All our focus is on electric and hybrid platforms now." Eleanor smiled. "Machines don't become useless. People just stop listening to them." She walked over, running her hand gently along the worn metal. The moment was quiet. But Vanessa saw it for what it was: proof that Eleanor's gift wasn't tied to technology levels. It was universal. She could feel the heart of a machine, no matter how old or advanced. That evening, back at Mason's auto, Dylan was waiting. "So," he asked, "did they offer you the moon?" Eleanor dropped her notebook onto the workbench. "They offered me something better." Dylan raised a brow. "Better than the moon? A chance to fix how people think about machines?" He smiled, the kind of smile that said he knew this day would come. "You're not going to stop being you, are you?" he asked. "Nope," Eleanor replied, grabbing a socket wrench. "But I might be able to make them a little more like me." As the sun dipped below the Montana hills, casting a golden glow over the dusty garage, Eleanor realized something. Opportunities weren't always about leaving home. Sometimes, they were about making the world big enough to fit into the space you already loved. And now the world was finally ready to listen. A few weeks passed, but life at Mason's Auto Repair didn't slow down. If anything, it got busier. Word had spread not just about the prototype Eleanor fixed, but about how she fixed it. She didn't just patch up a car. She taught an entire corporation how to listen differently. People from neighboring towns started showing up. Not because they thought Eleanor had some magic fix, but because they heard she cared enough to listen. And that's where the real change began. Eleanor found herself juggling two worlds. By morning, she was elbow-deep in old trucks and misfiring engines with Dylan, doing the kind of work that felt like breathing to her. But by afternoon, she'd join virtual meetings with engineers and designers from Stratus, where she'd review schematics, question design choices, and more often than not, point out things no one else noticed. She didn't use fancy language. She didn't need to. If a system felt tense, she said so. If a gear sounded tired, she made them check it again. At first, some of the engineers were skeptical. A few still rolled their eyes when she'd describe a vibration as moody or a circuit as stubborn. But when her observations kept leading them to problems they hadn't detected, skepticism turned into respect. One afternoon, a young engineer named Leo stayed back on a call after a session. "How do you know?" he asked, genuinely curious. "I mean, you can't see waveforms in your head. Can you?" Eleanor smiled. "It's not about seeing, it's about paying attention. Most people listen to fix. I listen to understand." That line stuck with him. It stuck with a lot of them. Bit by bit, the corporate walls that had felt so cold and rigid began to bend. Meetings became less about impressing with jargon and more about finding clarity. Teams started holding what they jokingly called Eleanor Checks sessions, where they'd step back from code and data to simply listen to how systems felt in practice. Dylan noticed the change too. One evening, as they were closing the shop, he leaned against the doorway and said, "You've turned those engineers into real mechanics?" Eleanor looked up from tightening a bolt. "What do you mean? Mechanics don't just fix parts. They feel the machine. You taught those folks to stop thinking they're smarter than the engine and start working with it." Eleanor shrugged, wiping her hands. "I didn't teach them anything they didn't already know. I just reminded them." But even as her world expanded, Eleanor stayed grounded. She refused to let Stratus move her to their city headquarters. The Harmony program was built around her, not the other way around. Every advancement they made had a piece of Mason's Auto in it. Grease-streaked sketches pinned up next to digital blueprints. Field tests happening in their gravel parking lot. And Vanessa, she changed too. Gone was the executive who thought power came from titles. Now, she spent more time in Oak Ridge than in the boardroom. She started showing up in jeans and boots, asking Dylan about carburetors, learning to hear the subtle things that Eleanor had always noticed. "I came here thinking I was saving my project," Vanessa said one afternoon, leaning on the workbench as Eleanor calibrated a sensor array. "But you ended up saving me from my own blind spots." Eleanor didn't respond with a grand speech. She just smiled and handed Vanessa a wrench. That's how she worked, quietly, steadily, one connection at a time. And it wasn't long before others noticed. Schools started reaching out, asking if Eleanor could teach workshops for students who didn't fit into traditional learning molds. Kids who learned better with their hands. Kids who were told they weren't technical enough because they didn't enjoy coding, but lit up when they took apart a lawnmower engine. Eleanor agreed, but only if the workshops happened in Oak Ridge. She wanted the kids to see that you didn't need a state-of-the-art lab to learn. You just needed curiosity, patience, and someone willing to listen. By now, even Dylan understood what was happening. Eleanor wasn't just fixing cars anymore. She was rebuilding how people approached problems. Not from the top down, but from the ground up. With every engine she tuned, every diagram she questioned, and every student she encouraged, Eleanor was shaping a new generation of thinkers, all without ever having a driver's license. The sun was setting over Oak Ridge, bathing Mason's Auto Repair in soft golden light. The garage, once a quiet, overlooked corner of town, now buzzed with a quiet but constant energy. Not from machines or engines this time, but from people. Kids, parents, curious neighbors. They came, not because Eleanor Mason had become some kind of celebrity, but because her story made them believe something simple, yet rare, that being underestimated wasn't a weakness, it was a hidden advantage. Eleanor sat on the tailgate of an old pickup, notebook in hand, as a small group of kids huddled around the hybrid prototype she had once saved. The same car that had nearly been scrapped by corporate ego now sat proudly in the center of the gravel lot, more than just a machine. It had become a symbol. One boy raised his hand. "How do you know when a machine's broken if it doesn't tell you what's wrong?" Eleanor smiled. "It does tell you. Just not in words." She hopped down, knelt beside the prototype, and tapped the paneling gently. "You've got to listen with more than your ears. Feel it, watch it. Machines get anxious when they're not working right. They hum differently. They breathe differently. You don't fix them by forcing them. You fix them by understanding them." The kids listened as if she were reading them a bedtime story. To them, she wasn't just a mechanic. She was a translator of things no one else bothered to hear. From a distance, Vanessa Whitmore watched the scene unfold. She had long since swapped her heels for sneakers and her boardroom for this gravel lot. To her, the investors had been won over. The contracts signed, the money secured, but that wasn't the victory. This was watching a girl who once got laughed at for not having a license, now teaching a group of future problem solvers to trust their instincts. Dylan came up beside her, arms folded, a soft grin on his face. "Never thought I'd see corporate executives hanging around Oak Ridge this much," he said. Vanessa chuckled. "I'm not here for business anymore. I'm here to learn." Dylan nodded. "Good, 'cause you're standing in the best classroom there is." Meanwhile, Eleanor was still teaching, not with slideshows or technical jargon, but with hands-on problem-solving. She handed a wrench to a girl who looked nervous, guiding her gently. "Feel that tension." "That's not wrong. It's just asking for balance." That simple sentence echoed louder than any formal lesson. It wasn't just about machines. It was about people. Balancing, listening, adjusting, not forcing. As twilight settled in, a local news crew arrived, their cameras discreetly capturing the moment. The anchor asked Eleanor for an interview, but she politely declined. "I don't fix cars for cameras," she said. "I fix them because they deserve to work right." The anchor smiled, respecting her answer more than any soundbite they could have scripted. Before the night was over, Vanessa approached Eleanor with a new proposal. "We want to expand the Harmony program," she said. "Not just for engineers, but for students, mechanics, even artists. Anyone who wants to learn how to listen better." Eleanor paused, considering. "Will it be in places like this?" "Exactly like this," Vanessa confirmed. Eleanor nodded. "Then it's worth doing." In that moment, standing in a dusty garage lot, surrounded by kids who saw possibilities instead of limits, Eleanor understood something. The million-dollar mystery she had solved wasn't just under the hood of a car. It was in the minds of people who had forgotten how to hear the quiet voices, the soft signals, the simple truths that machines and people whisper when we slow down enough to listen. She had never needed a license. What she had was far more powerful. She had trust in herself. She had respect for the machines she worked on. And now, she was teaching the world that sometimes the best solutions come from the least expected places. As the stars blinked awake in the sky, Eleanor closed her notebook, slung her wrench over her shoulder, and looked around at her small-town garage. It had never felt bigger. Anyone can learn to fix what's broken if they're willing to listen closely enough and believe deeply enough. As the sun set behind the old sign of Mason's Auto Repair, Eleanor Mason opened a fresh page in her grease-streaked notebook, not to sketch out another engine diagram, but to design a workshop for kids who'd once been told they weren't technical enough. This time, they'd hear something different. Because Eleanor knew now the dream she once kept tucked away in a small-town garage wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to every kid who's ever been overlooked. Every teenager with hands too small for a wrench, but a mind too curious to ignore. And every person who's ever been told they didn't belong. The girl who didn't even have a driver's license had become the mechanic who would tune the future. Because for Eleanor and for everyone who listens, the real power isn't in controlling machines. It's in understanding them. The end. Up next, 2 more stories that will challenge how you see the world. Click to keep learning with us, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe the underdog always deserves a chance.